And it's the 20th of May, 2024. Hey, everybody, this is Cardano Go Live Coding from Blink Labs, Gimbalabs, and friends. We get together on Mondays at 1300 UTC to build stuff together, but in a particular way. We're trying to build stuff that helps other people build more stuff. And it's been pretty exciting kind of looking at fundamental building blocks and thinking about how we're going to communicate to a global developer community how to use these pieces. Chris, I don't know if that has anything to do with what you were about to share, but what you've been working on?
Yeah, so I'm not going to take credit for any of this. Last week we spoke about creating a adder library starter kit, and I created the repo, and Alice here created a starter, using adder as a library starter kit.
Awesome.
So it's pretty simple in what it does right now. It just sets up an input on ChainSync and then an output to just dump to using the embedded output, which is how you use it as a library. So it creates the pipeline and all that kind of stuff. So we can go through that. It's super simple. It's really easy. And I think it'll be something we can build off of, to make sure it gives kind of a little bit fuller of a picture. Like right now, it's literally as simple as it can be just to operate.
Mhm.
Like there's no filtering or anything like that. We're not doing anything cool with the output. We're basically just dumping it to the screen so that you can, see how it goes, right? Because it's just an example. Um, yeah. Anyway, I think it'll
That's
be something interesting to
I
look at.
think that's killer. I mean, it's such an exciting moment the first time you see any sort of indexer just piping the results you want to the screen. And I think that does unlock people's understanding of what's happening there. So that's awesome. Well, what if today we started with a demo of that, and then with that demo in mind, we can go back to the course outline and really start fleshing out the details of that. How would that sound to everybody?
Sure. Sounds good.
Um, and Alice, would you be interested in giving the demo of what you've built so far?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, screen sharing is enabled. So yeah, if you just want to share screen and show us
Yeah,
what's here.
I was sorry, I was not ready for it. Let me just pull my things together.
No worries, take your time.
Give him a minute. Give him a minute. To pound down that coffee, and you
Yeah.
know,
Way to put them on the spot.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's great. I saw in the Demeter starter kit repo because I've been adding there. I saw that y'all put in a
Yeah,
PR for this library yesterday.
let me see. I'll just go that way. So let me see what I'm sharing.
real quick, I shared the link to it over in the chat, so you can follow along, play along at home if you want to.
Oof. Okay.
Yeah, and I
Library.
love how the Demeter link, the purple, the famous purple link is featured, so people can go that route.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea is it is a starter kit for Demeter, showcasing essentially how to do these things on Demeter, but the goal is to also make it simple for people to realize that there's no real magic there, right? They can see underneath the hood completely in these starter kits.
So, share. Am I sharing this?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can see GitHub. It looks good.
Okay, so that's the
it
the
actually
repo.
looks better before you went full screen.
Huh?
It looked
Okay,
better before you went full screen.
better now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't see what you see. So So because I only shared the window. So that's the repo that Chris mentioned. That's the header library starter kit. The main source, it's a single main Go example. So the idea was to use header, like we see here, header library that is from Blink Labs. And at the beginning, we actually just use the config, though, because it's also, you can use that repo with Demeter. So it just defines basic socket path or magic. And in Demeter we have, or if you locally define any Cardano node environment variables, they will get processed, and in that way you can get those variables here inside the program. Well, we define new pipeline, like we said here. That's the process that's gonna that we're gonna kick, and it's gonna run in the background. So the pipeline accepts inputs and outputs, and for our input we need chain sync input. We define here parameters for that for chain sync. So if I would run locally or in Demeter, I would use these two lines just because I would use local configuration. But if you want to start that program with using remote node, that if you are not running your own, you could use like another address and you define in that way. When we defined, this is just, we are adding input. We can accept more inputs like filters. We didn't do that in this example. Also, we want to accept outputs from on the events that are going to happen on the blockchain. And here we just fired we start a pipeline that is going to process the events that are going to happen in the background in separate coroutine. And here in the configuration, we defined callback for update status. And that's basically it from all the programs. So on each event, we are going to get call on of this function, or when the update, when the status get updated, we're going to get this function called. So if I would like, let me just try to, because I don't have that other library. If just to start, let me just prepare the window.
We'll go back to the README for a second while we're sitting here, and I can just kind of talk over while you get that set up. So one of the things here that's kind of neat about this, and what Alice was alluding to, is in Demeter, if you click on starting it in a Cardano workspace, what it actually starts up is a VS Code workspace running on Demeter with this repository checked out into that workspace. And you have to configure the workspace yourself. It says so right here. Essentially you can go and connect a node to that workspace, and that will automatically inject these environment variables that this application can read. Right. So you go and you add a Cardano node to your workspace, to your project in Demeter. That makes it available to your workspace. And then at that point, you'll have a fully synchronized Cardano node that you don't have to manage, or anything like that. And you can do this on whichever network you want. You can choose on Demeter whatever you want, and this detects it based off of the Cardano node magic environment variable that Demeter automatically injects. And then it automatically injects the path to the node socket, which is what we're using to talk to the node. And that's what we're using for communication here to get the chain sync. Right. So we're using the node to client communication in Adder in the input chainsync plugin. And as we saw back in that main Go, if you want to switch right back real quick, Alice, to the main Go while you're setting up your window there.
Sure. I hear.
Thank you. So, like back here, as we were setting up the pipeline, you saw we just set up basically an input and an output to the pipeline. Adder does have the ability for filters, and the filter event filtering allows you to filter, based off of like event types, addresses, policy IDs, particular assets, right? So it's extremely powerful in what you can build, and you can add the filters together. And it's a and filter, right? So whatever you add to the filtering, it has to match all of the things to make it through the pipeline to the output.
I don't quite understand the environment variables injection part. So I see that they're hard coded here. Where does Demeter inject those to?
Into the environment that it runs in. So in that workspace, like we're saying, that's a VS Code workspace, and it has those environment variables injected into that workspace.
Okay.
And so now when you go to run this starter kit in that workspace on Demeter, it just runs.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like having VS Code with a fully synchronized Cardano node locally, but obviously it's not local, right? It's just over the web.
Mm-hmm.
The workspaces are pretty cool because if you've ever used VS Code or anything like that, it is VS Code running directly on essentially the Demeter cloud.
Okay.
Right. Cool. Are you ready, Alice?
Yeah. Let me just switch the window that I'm sharing. Share screen. Okay. So I'm sharing here the Adder library. Is that visible?
Yep.
That window, that model. So I changed here. Because I don't have right now Cardano node locally running. So I uncomment this line, and that's IOG Cardano node, and I'm using still Magic for mainnet. So if I just go and start all that, we expect to start receiving the event that is happening on the blockchain. And here we see status update, and those are the events that are going to happen. And that's basically what this example is about.
And this is starting from now. It's not going back to an earlier era. This is just starting from the present.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, if you scroll up a tiny bit, Alice, in your main Go here. So we can see, yeah. So in the input ops, that's where we're configuring the chain sync.
Mm-hmm.
And you see there's a with intersect tip true.
Mm-hmm.
That's our shortcut that says start from now. Right. So instead you can give it a intersect that like not with intersect tip, you can do with intersect and give it a specific point to start at. And that will start at Genesis. And by default, if you do with intersect tip false, it should start at Genesis if you don't provide one. So, that would be how you could roll or start from the beginning of the chain. The main thing is that's super boring to show, right? Like this, it
Right,
it just kicks off
exactly.
right away, right?
Well, here you could have, I mean, so we can provide this to somebody, let them start playing with it on any network, and then we
Right.
can have them build a transaction, try to find that transaction in the log right here.
Yes.
And then can even move a step further and have them just add a line to create a filter, say, for the address that they're playing with. And then
Right.
that's
Exactly. And
that's a
then
really cool experience.
yeah, and now they're filtered to that particular address. And then, other things that you can do in the output handler is the events themselves that you actually receive as you are extremely rich,
Yes.
right? Like they have a lot of information in them that you can extract from them, and operate on them in various ways. In this case, what we've done is we literally take every single event that we get and just dump it,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
With no processing or filtering or, anything like that. And, like this is kind of, the talk here is kind of a preview to like the Rare Evo workshop stuff that I'm going to build, which will be fully open source, but using Adder as a library just like this, for building an NFT search engine. And so I'm going to show essentially that use case where we've now filtered it down to a very specific set of things, that make sense to my particular project, to my exact thing. And I'm going to show how we can utilize that. Right. So the idea with the starter kit is we're going to build on it and, slowly make it so it's a little bit bigger here and slightly bigger scope just to be able to show, like different filtering and different processing that you can do. Because in those events, like I said, it's extremely rich. Now you get, based on the event type, you can process it and determine, like for example, you can break down from the block and break down the individual transactions and loop through the transactions and potentially do stuff on specific actions. There's a lot that can be done with it, to try to figure out exactly how you want it to operate.
This is perfect.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things that Alice had shown here that he kind of alluded to and didn't really explain is this with status update func, and he's got the update status. And so what happens is inside the actual chain sync event that comes in, there's a there's a status structure in there that you can update that tells it where it is in the chain sync. So like when you're using persistence and you're storing stuff, you want to use that update status to both update the structure and then potentially also store it somewhere, right? So that it can be used and retrieved later to resume from a spot. So that's what we do in, like any of our applications that are using Adder, that has some kind of persistence. Yeah, there we go. There's a status update right there.
Yep. And how often does that fire?
The status update will fire every time there's like a new block or rollback.
Okay. New block or rollback. So we see all these transactions that are from a given block, but when a block is added, we should see that update status firing each
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Perfect.
So you'll see it's right after the block, right? We see received event, chain sync block, chain sync status update, and then you next see received event, chain sync transaction. And it's because that's essentially how we process it, right?
Yep.
We've got the block came in. Now that we have the block and we've processed it, right? Like now we're doing a status update from that block. And then we immediately start showing all of the, creating events from all of the individual transactions within that block.
Mm-hmm.
And, so like when we're doing filtering, you can filter to types and like chain sync block, chain sync transaction. These are types that you can filter to. Like there's an awful lot here that we're like not showing in this particular application because it's just in Adder and what it can do. that,
Right.
you know, I kind of wanted to have us discuss and build on, and, you know, like what makes sense to kind of put into this. Like what would you want to see? Like that's really the question is we've made this and we've put no filtering in whatsoever, but like what example would you like to see?
Yep.
Filter by address, filter to policy
And
ID? Like,
anybody who's here, yeah, what are you thinking? Like if you have an application in your mind, what would you like to see an example of filtering by?
so we use like filter by address an awful lot,
Mhm.
you know, and I think that that's a pretty common one. You know, but
Any validator, right? Any application you build with any validator, it's
yes,
helpful to know only the transactions to and from that validator address.
right, right, absolutely, absolutely.
But then as
Um,
with the Rare Evo workshop that you mentioned,
mhm,
if I'm curious about any NFT, okay, filter by policy ID.
right, right. And you know exactly, and taking this starter kit, you know, the nice thing about the starter kit, as I said, is it's designed for you to go in and hack yourself, right?
Mhm.
You run the starter kit, you start it, you get your workspace over in Demeter, you're able to start it, you're able to run it, you're able to see it doing stuff unprocessed with no filtering, etc. Now you start hacking on it to make your own app, make what you want, and you can just click the run again, right? And it runs, you know, just as Alice had showed, you know, but you're able to run it in Demeter and not have to worry about the infrastructure or anything like that. And, you know, so you can run against remote nodes or running it in Demeter. And, you know, like personally, the reason why I'm opting for and look at doing stuff in Demeter is because your next step is probably going to be you're actually wanting to host it and run it somewhere.
Right.
And generally, your application is going to have more requirements necessarily than just indexing, right? So you're probably going to want other things that Demeter offers, other types of things to build a fully fledged application, right?
And this pushes you step by step towards that. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the idea is like I said, you start off with a, you know, this runs and is ready for you to start kind of breaking it, right? Go tinker.
Yep. I did a
Uh,
thing. Yeah, now I can fearlessly play with it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, like back to the Builderfest workshop that we built, you know, the indexer part of the Builderfest workshop uses Adder and is a slightly more advanced version showing filtering with multiple addresses in the pipeline. And so that's now also one of the things here is being able to take now this super simple example and look at something that's a little bit more complex, and now being able to make those connections mentally, right? Oh, I see what they did right there, right? Now I know why he did this.
It's the how and the why, right? You're building
Right.
up both of those side by side. So this is okay. So let me pull this up on the screen here. We had a really cool check-in last week about a course we're building. And we have an outline that I'm pretty excited about. Um, these are module titles, right? So the numbers just allow us to place things in order. The titles are what matter most. And this is what we came up with last week. Interacting with the node, building transactions, then reacting to events. A lot of what we're looking at here with the adder starter kit is going to fit here. And then going a little deeper, broader queries and data providers, building apps and interacting with smart contracts, serializing data. Chris, I added this one here. I think this is great. What to do when none of it actually works. And
Yeah, yeah.
finally, opportunities to contribute. So this is a pretty cool outline. And in each of these, our next step in outlining the course is now to drill down to what are called learning targets. What are the I can statements that we're going to put in front of students as they work through each of these modules in this order? And here, if we look at this one for a minute, we can really start to imagine what the learning targets might be. And it's not just about learning targets, right? There's always going to be this give and take. What are the things we want learners to learn and be able to do? But also, what's the thing? What's the project they're working on? Right? What's their reason why they need to learn about these tools, like Chris was just talking about? And how does all that work? Now we have, I think, a core project for module 103 when it comes to reacting to chain events. And you'll see these are not I can statements yet. These are just placeholders. But I wonder if we could think about this example together and come up with the sequence of learning targets that people will be working on, starting from the bare bones adder starter kit, and then thinking about what we want them to do each step of the way. So just from a process standpoint, does anybody have any questions about anything I just said?
Nope, sounds good to me.
So what if we try to flesh this out? So we have this example starter kit. We recognize that after people get it running, either on Demeter or, we can show them the option of running it locally. Both of those are fine. When we introduce it, we can show how to hook up to a node that's already running on Demeter, or how to change the IP address of a public relay, or even how to connect to a local node if somebody happens to have one running. That's all well and good. And now we get to the point of seeing in our terminal this event log. And then we say, okay, well, what can we now build with this thing? You've got it working. What can we build? And it seems like first thing we want to do is just introduce the essential concept of filter.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Just, okay, you can filter by rollbacks, blocks, and transactions. Great. Then we take filtering a step further and we say, okay, well, for most applications, the most interesting thing to filter is going to be transactions. And we can now filter those transactions by any number of things. That's where the why and the how come in at the same time. Why would I want to filter by address, and how do I do that? Why would I want to filter by policy ID, and how would I do that? How's that story starting to sound to people?
I like it.
So we can
Absolutely.
say, oh,
I mean, because we can go from there. And here's the thing is so here reacting to the chain events, the idea is we talk about what you can do with Adder itself, as in modifying the pipeline, right? As you said, filtering which different kind of filters you want to play with and how you want to use that. Yeah. I mean, we can.
right. So step one is just you got to be able to run the thing. There we go.
Yeah.
Then we want to be able to, like, what do we introduce first? The basic concept of filtering, or do we survey the options for connecting to a node? What's somebody coming into this relatively new, perhaps?
So definitely Node.
Mhm.
So we would, running the starter kit, connecting it to a Cardano node, right? You configure it to connect to different node types, right? Right, exactly. And then, I can filter in certain, like yeah,
Right.
I can filter.
By event type first.
Yeah. I can filter by event type.
And then I can filter transactions
Exactly.
by,
X,
doesn't
Y,
matter, we
Z.
could do address first or policy ID first, but each of these turns into a tiny little bite-sized lesson.
Yep.
It's a nice little thing that people can wrap their head around. And not written necessarily into these learning targets is the why, right?
Yeah.
That's
I can
what goes in
filter.
the lesson.
Yeah. Here's another good one. I can filter by pool ID.
Nice.
Let's make sure we also support our SPO friends, right? Or people that are building apps related to staking or.
Very good. Right. Well, you could filter by, and we like address could be subdivided. We can say like filtering by validator address, filtering by staking credential,
Yep.
um, filter by simple wallet address, live demo, try sending a TX, try adding your address as a filter,
Yep.
then try sending a TX and watch the output. So it's like, now we're showing people, okay, here's the basic thing, here's how it works, and people are going to see in a very direct way, holy cow, I just sent a transaction and I see it. All right, cool,
Right.
you got it. You got the whole pattern now. Now, how might you use this in an application, right? Well, validator address. And these both get to use cases.
Right.
And now we're starting to build a little project as we go here, right?
Yep.
Oh, you know, Zoom, this is still a little bug. I gotta fix this. The Zoom on Linux is preventing me from editing in my browser sometimes.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's weird.
So,
TX.
what I was going to say from here is essentially what we end up with in this case is we should end kind of back at well, sorry, after we save out of this guy and kind of go back to the. Hey, all right. So, the webhook, like we probably don't want a webhook example or necessarily the custom indexer quite yet.
Great.
Specifically, because the main thing is that even the custom indexer really gets to indexing specifically. It would be something where you're gonna probably have some kind of storage, right? So
Right.
this is still like really chain event,
Right.
right?
Reacting
So
to chain events. Yeah.
right. So the last thing, right, really should kind of end at here. Like I can write a, thing that responds to on-chain events. And it can do
Cool.
anything at that point. And, like one example that we currently have is we just log to the screen, but maybe you want to have it do literally anything else, right? And that's the point is this is the plugin step where we can really, show them that once you're able to respond to that event, like you can have it do anything. And the next step when we talk about querying, like when we get to querying the blockchain and that stuff, that happens in that event handler. Right.
Very
So like we
good.
basically lead them through here's how you get to the point where you're now handling the event that you want or events that you want. Right. And the event handler itself is where you can explode outward. It can get bigger. You can add querying. You can add all of these other things. Potentially, you add your own storage and persistence, right? Like all of that essentially happens when you get to the chain. And so, we obviously want to show like kind of a simple point and to speak to what you had said before, right? We show them, like, oh, well, we can make it curl an address, or we can make it, put something in a Redis, and then just kind of leave it at that. And then we move to the next one where we're querying a blockchain because, right, like someone's like, okay, well, now I've got this event and I can do a lot of things in it. And then we start showing them what they can do. Right.
Very good. Well, so this becomes really interesting. So, right, when we talk about querying, we can give a quick overview of, okay, here's just a list of providers you might use, and here's how to configure them in, we can select a library, right? So
Right.
whether it's Apollo is probably the best one to show people.
Yeah.
Essential, pulling in a provider. But then we come full circle back to everything that was introduced in module 103. And we say,
Right.
okay, yeah, global queries, those are going to be useful sometimes, but often you're going to have some specific query needs. Let's start putting the puzzle pieces together of what we talked about in module 103 with some of the other practical implementation details. And maybe here is where we introduce the word indexer, this thing called an indexer.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing here is we can show adding, we can show using query. Yes. Yeah. So this, what I was going to get at is we can show querying a provider, a data store, anything like that for potentially additional information. And the reason is as we kind of go from handling on-chain events, one of the things that you're going to find is that there's only certain interactions that we're capable of processing with an event pipeline. So a good example, and this is one of the reasons why I put in like filter by pool ID, is I can show you that someone delegates to a pool, but I can't show you that someone leaves a pool without knowing where they are now.
Yeah.
And an event doesn't tell you that. An event tells you I'm moving to pool, but you have to have some way of knowing, well, where from. And the event doesn't actually tell you that. The event just says I'm in this pool now. Right.
So something along these lines is the idea, right? So we can say, okay, well, let us just show you there's a set of global query providers, and
Right.
maybe you don't always want to use those. We can introduce the idea of an indexer and some of the practical concerns that follow from there, storage, etc. And then we could say, well, actually, just as you're starting to wonder, why would I ever need a blockchain scale query provider? Why can't I use an indexer all the time? We say, okay, well, here's why. There's limits. And
Right.
Chris, that was perfect, right? Like, here's an example of something you can't do by watching an event pipeline. And as we start to really move towards applications, we got to understand that distinction.
Yeah. And so, maybe one other thing to insert here would be storing and retrieving data.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's essentially when you start kind of building your own indexer, is like, now we've got data, now we're filtering, now we're getting events, and sometimes we need to reference past events. Right. And that's where, storing and retrieving the data comes in. Yeah. Yeah. Something like that looks good.
Is there a natural place in a module like this to introduce UTXO RPC, or does that get saved for a different time?
I think that's going to need to go somewhere else here.
let's drop it for now, because this is
Yep.
starting to turn into a really clean story here.
Yeah. And maybe we swap, understand the limits. So bring that one above storing and retrieving data. Right, because sorry, I meant the other way. Move storing and retrieving data down. Yeah, because the idea is with an event handler, right? You basically have two choices, and your two choices end up being now, if you need historical data, is store it myself, right? Or to start with, query someone else, right? Like someone else has already stored this historical data, so during an event, I can still query that, right?
So I need some data. What are my options?
Yeah. And the options are query someone else or store it myself and query, right?
Right.
And so we start off basically with the idea of how to query it from someone else, right? Which means you can also limit your storage, your eventing, all that sort of stuff. Because
Right.
a good example of where we did this in the Builderfest workshop is we showed two different places where we're querying somewhere else. And one of them is when transactions come in, we only get the input references. So like we don't know what address sent specific things or things like that from the actual event. We only know the outputs essentially, and then references to previous outputs, not the actual resolved output. And so one of the things that we do is we query as the events come in for each transaction, we query the inputs from a historical storage and resolve them so that now we're able to say this transmission happened from address A to address B. Whereas before all we had was like a bunch of random inputs and then address B. And then maybe address A also listed in outputs, but you don't know who was the sender and who's the receiver, in that situation. So you're able to resolve it. And then the other place would be is if you're building transactions or doing anything like that using an address that isn't necessarily your own or UTXOs that aren't in your filter set, you might need to reach out to query additional data you didn't have. And that doesn't even have to be you're querying a remote indexer. It could be anything, right? Like it could be, oh, I'm fetching from a URL, right, to get this additional data. It can be anything. And that's kind of like what we really want to get to is, this is your off-chain code. So you're not strictly limited to what's available on chain. Right. I mean, at the point when you start talking about handling the events, we can make the events do anything during that event loop. Right. It can query Coinbase for the price of ADA as an
Right.
example, right? In USD. So it could, show, oh, well, James address A transferred, to address B, like 14 ADA, and then also put the price in USD in that output, right? And you're enriching that event. And so, querying from the blockchain and other blockchain indexes is just one of the ways that you can enrich that event, during the event handler. And again, that event handler could be as complex as you want, right? So like that's really where we kind of show, and that's what kind of where it's like, okay, you get to the point where you're like handling an event, and then we show a little bit of what you can do with the event, and then we've got all of these other things, right? So now you're talking about indexing, or you're talking about querying indexers or querying remote data. You're talking about dealing with applications and smart contracts, and we can kind of like tie it all together and then show how an application could actually do those things too. Right.
There's kind of a fabulous bait and switch that emerges. Okay, so you can query data from anywhere. And the simple fact is, if you just wanted to use a remote provider, you can do everything you need to do.
Yes.
From a just making a thing work perspective, an indexer is never expressly necessary. Storing your own data is never expressly necessary. So,
Unless
yeah,
right, unless you want to enrich with additional off-chain data.
okay. So if I want to do any sort of novel processing of on-chain data with any amount of other data,
Anything else, right?
anything else. Okay, so it's right. So like the trivial answer to this question is performance, but it's more than that.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Performance is definitely one, you know, because as pretty much anyone will tell you, building something where you've explicitly constrained the data set to the data you care about is going to be more performant than something that has, you know, a vast amount of data that has to be searched.
So now we get to this question, right? So okay, you could use remote providers, but if you want to build a performant app, here's like the cartoon explanation of why an indexer might be something you want to build, or why a private store might be something you want.
Right.
But this gets really interesting. Now suppose that you want to build some kind of middleware or API service that doesn't just pull in the on-chain data, but it does some novel business logic. Now storing yourself is going to become a compelling thing. Okay. And then
Right.
we come back to this question. Well, okay, the opposite question. Well, if I could store data myself, why would I want to query it from somewhere else?
Right. And, you know, the
Events
answer,
don't tell us everything.
right. Events don't tell us everything. The other thing is complexity. Not every use case needs to build all of those things. A lot of times the information that they need is easily, readily available from these indexers.
Right. Right. Maestro, for example, does a lot more than just give us raw data. It gives us some really nice, opinionated, helpful endpoints. Shoot, can you guys hear me? Hey,
Welcome
I
back.
think my internet just hiccuped.
Well,
Not sure where I fell off.
oh, hey, look at that. Yeah, okay, so not every use case needs to build from scratch. Take a looking at at what light wallets need, right? Because the answer for like a light wallet provider is oh well, I need every address potentially. I need, right? So there's no advantage necessarily in hyper specialization.
Yes.
Right. And another advantage would be, you know, speed of delivery. If you are, you know, utilizing something that someone else has built and someone else is managing, and you're focused only on your own stuff, right? You very likely are going to be able to deliver much quicker.
Right.
And, you know, like this was a lesson that was given at Builder Fest, right, by Alex from Token Allies. And, you know, he was talking about how much they recommend, you know, people use providers for these sort of things because it allows them to focus on their business logic. It allows them to focus on, you know, like delivering a proof of concept, project, product, that sort of thing. And, you know, the nice thing is you can always, with effort, of course, but you can always divorce yourself from these providers.
Right.
And even more so if you're using some kind of abstraction. So, you know, like we had talked about using Apollo, for example, and Apollo has its own abstraction over providers. So, Apollo works with Block Frost or with Maestro or right, or with Kupo and Agmios, or it even has a null provider, which we use all the time so that we can fit its own information into it. Right.
Right.
So, and that's where the abstraction also helps, to where like these things matter less. Right. So you can start with, for example, like, hey, let's just start with, Maestro. Let's just start with whatever. They got a free tier. Let's do it. Or, hey, I want to start on Demeter and use their free tier. Like that's the nice thing about everybody with the free tiers, is you can try it out. Block Frost is the same. Try it out, see whether it works for you, and then make decisions for you and your project that makes the most sense. Right. Some projects need, like very specific data. Maybe they need to enrich, maybe they need to do this stuff. So building a custom indexer is the right answer. For other projects, it might make sense that, just using a system with abstractions and being able to scale over various providers is what makes sense for them. Right. And, so again, I think the goal is, to show people the pros and cons of each approach.
Yeah. We're building up like in real time a decision tree with learners as they go through here. They're understanding options. They're starting to understand, as they do start to build their own architecture, what decisions they'll have to make and why they might go this way or that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Before I got dropped, you were making me think like Maestro, for example, is not just a raw data provider. It already has some really nice pre-processing of the on-chain data, which means that you probably won't have to build from scratch this creative filter. It might be there already.
Right. Absolutely. And especially, like if you're talking about enriching blockchain primitives with other blockchain info, right, where they've done the correlations already. Like a good example of probably the best one there is resolving datums. Because in most cases, like if you're doing a lot of this stuff, you have to go and you'll get like a datum hash or something like that, or like a reference input or something like that, where it's referencing some previous thing on the chain and it's not even your address, it might be some other address, right? And you've got to go and query the information about that. And so again, it ends up being something that either you have to figure out how to get and store in your application yourself, or you can just go and query it from someone else.
That's great. Well, I didn't realize we're at time. Shoot. But damn, this is getting really fun. I only noticed because I saw people start to drop off.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we just gave, module 201, for example, a nice little deep dive treatment, and now we've got an outline of what we can initially introduce. Everything just from the adder starter kit flows nicely into these examples. I mentioned earlier, these are going to be like little bite-sized lessons, piece by piece, putting them together. And then once people are comfortable and they've technically got their hands on the thing, then we blow the lid off of it here and get into these bigger conversations around all of our options for querying the blockchain, which gets into the outline that we were just looking at right here. And then finally now, we'll be able to talk about building applications, interacting with smart contracts, looking backwards. We are going to introduce a couple things here, but this is what we'll continue to flesh out. And what's coming together really nicely here is Blink Labs, you guys are building these starter kits that people can play with right away. They're integrated with Demeter. That's incredible. We have enough to get people started. And then we need a couple of projects that we can refer back to again and again throughout this course that's now where we come full circle back to the Andamio CLI. That's one example of like a live project that the Andamio team can use little examples from that, but certainly it's not the only one, right? So the NFT indexer, Chris, that you were talking about that you'll demo this summer, maybe some portion of that becomes a project that's running throughout several of these modules right here. And if there's other projects that people can imagine wanting to put in front of students, whether it's a toy project or something vital that we just need more eyes on, keep thinking of that kind of thing, because as we finish this outline, we're gonna get to the point where we'll want to talk about the specifics of those projects, because those will be used in the lessons. Awesome.
right.
Incredible. That went way too fast, but Chris, thanks for thinking about that. Alice, thanks for starting us with the demo, and really good stuff, everybody. I'm excited about this.
See you next week.
Till next time. Yep. Cheers, everybody. See you soon.